There are moments when hope that has been kept alive through sheer force of will for years suddenly transforms into reality, when a family that has been incomplete for so long they have almost forgotten what wholeness feels like discovers that the missing piece still exists and can be found, and when grief that has defined every family gathering and every holiday is suddenly replaced by joy so profound that it seems impossible to contain. Sometimes the people we lose are not lost to death, but to circumstances that tear them away from us. Sometimes the search for a missing loved one becomes the organizing principle of an entire family's existence, and sometimes the universe arranges for that search to end not in private relief, but in public celebration that allows a community to witness the miracle of someone coming home. These are the stories that humble us with their testament to the power of persistence, that remind us that families who refuse to give up on their missing members sometimes do find them, and that challenge us to honor both the years of anguish and the moment of recovery with equal weight. If you believe that every missing person deserves to be searched for, that families who never stop looking for their missing loved ones demonstrate a form of love that deserves recognition, and that the recovery of someone who has been missing for years is a cause for collective celebration, hit that like button and subscribe for stories about the most determined searches and the most miraculous recoveries, and about families who prove that sometimes refusing to accept loss is exactly the right response. The Harrison family walked onto the Family Feud stage on a Friday afternoon in November with an energy that seemed to vibrate with barely contained emotion, as if they were all holding something so significant that keeping it inside required physical effort. The family consisted of 52-year-old Patricia Harrison as team captain, her husband Robert age 54, their son Michael age 31, their daughter Jennifer age 28, and notably, a young woman in her mid-20s named Rachel who bore a striking resemblance to Patricia, but whose relationship to the family was not immediately clear from the introductions. Steve Harvey greeted the Harrison family with his characteristic warmth, immediately picking up on the unusual energy they were projecting, but not yet understanding its source. There was something in the way they kept looking at Rachel, something in the way Patricia held Rachel's hand as if afraid to let go, something in the way the entire family seemed to be vibrating with suppressed emotion. Steve conducted his standard pre-game interview, asking Patricia about her family and their background. The Harrisons were from Phoenix, Arizona, Patricia explained, and they had applied to be on Family Feud as a family bonding experience. Steve chatted with Robert about his work as an engineer, with Michael about his career as a firefighter, with Jennifer about her job as a nurse. Standard game show conversation designed to make the family comfortable and give the audience a sense of who they were. Then Steve turned to Rachel, the young woman whose connection to the family had not yet been explained. "And who do we have here?" Steve asked with a warm smile. "How are you related to the Harrison family?" The question hung in the air for a moment that stretched too long, and Steve noticed immediately that something shifted in the family's energy. Patricia's grip on Rachel's hand tightened. Robert's jaw clenched. Michael and Jennifer both had tears forming in their eyes. Rachel looked at Patricia as if seeking permission, and Patricia nodded. When Rachel spoke, her voice was quiet but steady. "My name is Rachel Harrison. I am Patricia and Robert's daughter. I am Michael and Jennifer's sister." Steve nodded, about to move on to his next question, but something in the way Rachel had said those words, the particular emphasis and emotion, made him pause. "Okay, so you are the middle child?" Steve asked, trying to understand why such a simple statement of relationship had created such visible emotion in the family. Patricia spoke before Rachel could respond, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of years of grief and recent overwhelming joy. "Mr. Harvey, Rachel is our daughter. But we need to tell you something before we play this game. We need to tell you why we are really here and what has happened to our family. Because we did not come just to compete on Family Feud. We came to share something that we have been praying would happen for 17 years. We came to tell the world that we found our missing daughter. We found Rachel. After 17 years of searching, after 17 years of not knowing if she was alive or dead, after 17 years of never giving up hope, We finally found her 6 weeks ago. And she is here. She is standing on this stage with us. Our family is whole again for the first time in 17 years. The studio went completely silent. Steve Harvey stood frozen, his expression showing that he was trying to process what Patricia had just said. The audience sat in absolute stillness, everyone understanding that they were about to hear something extraordinary. Steve's voice when he finally spoke was quiet and careful. "Mrs. Harrison, are you telling me that Rachel was missing? That she disappeared and you did not know where she was for 17 years? Patricia nodded, tears now streaming freely down her face. "Rachel disappeared when she was 9 years old, Mr. Harvey. She was abducted from a park 3 blocks from our house on August 14, 2007. One moment she was playing with other children, and the next moment she was gone. We searched for her. The police searched for her. The FBI was involved. Her case was on national news. We did everything we could possibly do to find her. But she was gone. For 17 years, we did not know if our daughter was alive. For 17 years, we lived in this terrible limbo of hope and grief. And then 6 weeks ago, through a series of events that still seem miraculous, we found her. We found our daughter. And she is home." Steve Harvey stood absolutely still, his face showing shock and grief and dawning understanding of the magnitude of what he was being told. The cameras continued rolling because the camera operators understood they were witnessing something historic. Steve looked at Rachel, this young woman in her mid-20s who had been standing quietly next to Patricia, and he saw her with new understanding. "Rachel, you were abducted when you were 9 years old. And you have been missing for 17 years. Where were you? What happened to you?" Rachel took a deep breath, and when she spoke her voice carried the control of someone who had told this story many times in recent weeks, but who still found it difficult to voice aloud. "I was taken by a woman named Carol Jensen who abducted me from that park when I was 9. She moved me across the country to Maine and raised me as her daughter under a different name. She told me that my real parents had died, that she had adopted me, that my life before age 9 was something I needed to forget and move forward from. I believed her, Mr. Harvey. For 17 years I believed I was Hannah Jensen, that Carol was my adoptive mother, that my biological parents were dead. I had no reason to question it, because I was so young when I was taken, and because Carol was skilled at manipulating me." Steve Harvey's face showed horror as he processed what Rachel was describing. "You lived with your abductor for 17 years thinking she was your adoptive mother. How did your family find you? What made you discover the truth?" Rachel glanced at Patricia, who nodded encouragement. "Carol died 2 months ago from a sudden heart attack. After her death, I was going through her papers and belongings, trying to settle her estate and figure out my own legal status, since I thought I had been adopted but could not find adoption papers. I found documents hidden in her closet. Documents that showed my real name was Rachel Harrison, that I had been reported missing in 2007, that Carol had created false identification for me. I found newspaper clippings about my abduction. I found my real birth certificate, and I realized that everything Carol had told me was a lie. My parents were not dead. I had not been adopted. I had been stolen from my family when I was 9 years old and raised by my abductor under a false identity." The studio audience was crying openly, many people holding each other as they listened to Rachel's story. Steve Harvey had tears streaming down his face, and his voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. "What did you do when you found out the truth? How did you reconnect with your family?" Rachel's voice cracked as she answered. "I went to the police in Maine with the documents I had found. They verified my identity through DNA testing and contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who contacted the FBI, who contacted the Phoenix Police Department, who contacted my parents. And 6 weeks ago, I got a phone call from a detective in Phoenix who told me that my family had been looking for me for 17 years, that they had never stopped searching, that they were still in Phoenix, and they wanted to talk to me. And then I heard my mother's voice for the first time in 17 years, and everything that I had thought was my past dissolved, and my real past came flooding back. Memories I had been told to suppress, memories Carol had trained me to bury, they all started returning. And I remembered my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister. I remembered being Rachel Harrison. Patricia could not contain herself any longer. She wrapped her arms around Rachel and sobbed, and the entire Harrison family gathered around Rachel, all of them crying together in front of the cameras and the studio audience. Steve Harvey watched this reunion playing out in real time, this family physically demonstrating the wholeness they had described, and he was completely overwhelmed. His face showed that he was struggling to maintain composure, struggling to find words adequate to what he was witnessing. After several long moments, Steve spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I cannot do this. I cannot stand here right now. I need a moment." And Steve Harvey turned and walked off the stage, leaving the Harrison family standing there, leaving the audience sitting in shocked silence, leaving the cameras still rolling on the extraordinary scene. Steve was gone for nearly 5 minutes, during which time the production team did not stop filming, because they understood that what was happening transcended the normal structure of a game show taping. The Harrison family stood together on stage, holding Rachel, crying together, and the studio audience bore witness to their reunion and their grief and their joy all tangled together in a way that defied easy categorization. When Steve finally returned to the stage, his face was blotchy from crying and his eyes were red. He approached the Harrison family with visible emotion. "I am sorry. I am sorry. I just could not stand there and hear that story without breaking down completely. I have interviewed thousands of people, I have heard countless stories, but what you just told me about losing Rachel for 17 years and finding her again, about her living with her abductor thinking it was normal life, about you never giving up searching, I could not handle that standing up on stage in front of everyone. I had to leave. I had to take a moment." Patricia reached out and took Steve's hand. "We understand, Mr. Harvey. This story overwhelms us too, and we have been living it. We know how impossible it seems. We know how painful it is, and we know how miraculous the ending is." Steve nodded, still visibly struggling with his emotions. "Can you tell me about those 17 years? What was it like for your family, not knowing where Rachel was? How did you keep searching?" Robert Harrison, who had been quiet until this point, spoke. "Mr. Harvey, when your child goes missing, your life stops. Everything stops. In the immediate days and weeks after Rachel was taken, we did nothing but search. We organized search parties. We distributed flyers. We did media interviews. We worked with law enforcement. We followed every lead, every tip, every possible sighting. And when the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months with no results, we had to figure out how to keep living while our daughter was gone." Robert's voice broke as he continued. "We had 2 other children, Michael and Jennifer, who were teenagers when Rachel was taken. They needed parents who could function, who could provide some sense of normalcy and stability, so we had to find a way to balance searching for Rachel with being present for our other children. It was impossible. There is no way to do both things adequately. You cannot fully be present with your living children when your missing child is consuming all your emotional energy. But we tried. We tried so hard. We never stopped looking for Rachel. We worked with private investigators. We submitted her DNA to every missing persons database. We maintained a website dedicated to finding her. We did media interviews every year on the anniversary of her disappearance to keep her case in the public eye. We never, ever gave up hope that we would find her alive." Jennifer, Rachel's younger sister, spoke through her tears. "I was 11 when Rachel disappeared. Michael was 14. We lost our sister, but we also lost our parents in a way because they were so consumed with searching for her that they could not fully be there for us. I do not blame them. I understand why finding Rachel had to be their primary focus. But growing up in a house where everyone was grieving a missing child, where every holiday and birthday was marked by Rachel's absence, where we could not move forward because we were always searching for her, it was really hard. Michael and I spent our teenage years and our 20s with this hole in our family, with the sister we remembered but who was not there. And we both struggled with guilt, wondering if there was something we could have done differently the day she was taken, wondering why we did not protect her better." Michael added his perspective. "I became a firefighter because of Rachel, because I wanted to be someone who saved people, who helped people in crisis, who maybe could prevent other families from experiencing what we experienced. Losing Rachel defined who I became as an adult. It shaped every major decision I made, and now she is back, and I am trying to reconcile the 9-year-old sister I remember with this 26-year-old woman I am getting to know. It is joyful and it is grief-inducing simultaneously because I see all the years we lost, all the experiences we did not get to share, all the growing up we did not do together. Steve listened to the family describe the 17 years of Rachel's absence, and his expression showed that he was struggling to maintain composure while bearing witness to their story. Steve turned to Rachel. "You lived for 17 years thinking you were Hannah Jensen, thinking Carol was your adoptive mother, thinking your biological parents were dead. What was that life like? Did you have a good childhood despite being with your abductor?" Rachel considered the question carefully before responding. "That is a complicated question to answer, Harvey. Carol was not physically abusive. She did not hurt me in obvious ways. She sent me to school, she made sure I had food and clothes, she took me to doctor appointments. To the outside world, she appeared to be a normal single mother raising her adopted daughter. But she was also emotionally manipulative and controlling in ways I am only now beginning to understand with the help of therapists. She isolated me from forming deep friendships. She moved us frequently so I never put down roots anywhere. She discouraged me from being curious about my supposed adoption or my supposed biological parents. She created an entire false identity for me and trained me to accept it without question." Rachel's voice grew stronger as she continued. "So was my childhood good? In some ways, yes. I had stability, education, the basics of care, but it was all built on a foundation of lies and theft. Carol stole me from my family. She deprived me of 17 years with my real parents and siblings. She deprived my family of 17 years with me. She took a 9-year-old child from a park and raised that child to believe a completely false narrative about her identity and origins. That is profound trauma, Mr. Harvey. That is a violation that affects every aspect of who I am. So no, my childhood was not good in the ways that matter most. It was a childhood stolen and built on theft." Steve asked the question that everyone watching wanted to understand. "Why? Why did Carol take you? Did she explain her motivations in any way before she died?" Rachel shook her head. "I will never know for certain because she died before I discovered the truth. But from what investigators have pieced together, Carol had lost custody of her own biological daughter years before she abducted me. Her daughter was removed by Child Protective Services due to neglect, and Carol had her parental rights terminated. She was apparently obsessed with having a daughter, and when she saw me playing in that park, she took the opportunity to replace the child she had lost. She moved us across the country, created false documentation, and raised me as her own. In her mind, I think she genuinely believed she was my mother, and that what she did was justified somehow. But whatever her psychological reasoning, what she did was kidnapping. What she did was destroy my family and steal 17 years of my life." Steve stood there processing everything he had heard, and his face showed that he was still struggling to hold himself together. "I need to ask something that I am almost afraid to ask, but I think people need to understand. Rachel, you have been home for 6 weeks. You spent 17 years believing Carol was your mother and believing your real family was dead. Now you know the truth. How are you adjusting to being back with your biological family? Do you remember them from before you were taken?" Rachel looked at Patricia and Robert before answering. "I do remember them, but those memories were deeply buried by years of being told they were not real or not relevant. When I first heard my mother's voice on the phone 6 weeks ago, something inside me recognized it, even though consciously I had not remembered it. When I met my family in person, when I saw my mother's face and my father's face and my siblings' faces, there was recognition. But 17 years is a long time. I was 9 when I was taken. I am 26 now. I missed my entire adolescence and early adulthood with my real family. So am I adjusting? Yes. Is it easy? No. It is one of the hardest things I have ever done." Rachel's voice cracked as she continued. "I am grieving the mother who raised me even though she was my abductor, because she was the only mother I knew for 17 years. I am trying to rebuild relationships with my real parents and siblings who are essentially strangers to me despite being my biological family. I am processing the trauma of discovering that my entire identity was a lie. I am angry at Carol for what she did. I am grateful to be home but also overwhelmed by how different this life is from the one I thought I had. So to answer your question about adjustment, Mr. Harvey, I am taking it one day at a time with a lot of therapy and a lot of support from my family and from professionals who work with recovered missing persons and survivors of long-term abduction. Patricia spoke up, adding her perspective on the reunion and adjustment. When we got the call that Rachel had been found, when we learned she was alive and that we could talk to her, it was the greatest moment of our lives and also the most terrifying. Because we did not know if she would remember us. We did not know if she would want to come home. We did not know what kind of life she had been living or what trauma she had experienced. And when we finally saw her, when we held her for the first time in 17 years, it was both exactly what we had been dreaming of and also more complicated than we had imagined. This is our daughter. We love her unconditionally, but she is also a 26-year-old adult who we do not know because we missed 17 years of her life. So we are all learning each other again. We are all figuring out how to be a family when we have been broken for so long. Steve Harvey stood there listening to the Harrison family describe the complexity of their reunion, and his face showed a mixture of joy for their recovery of Rachel and profound sadness for everything they had lost and could never recover. Steve turned to address the cameras and the studio audience. Ladies and gentlemen, what we are witnessing here today is a miracle and a tragedy happening simultaneously. A miracle because Rachel Harrison was found alive after 17 years missing. A tragedy because those 17 years were stolen from this family by someone who had no right to take them. This family spent 17 years searching, hoping, grieving, and refusing to give up. And their persistence paid off. Their daughter came home. But the price of that miracle was 17 years of lost time, lost memories, lost experiences that can never be recovered. Steve paused, visibly struggling to continue. I walked off this stage a few minutes ago because I could not stand there and hear this story without breaking down. I have children. I cannot imagine what it would be like to have a child disappear and not know for 17 years whether they were alive or dead. I cannot imagine the strength it took for this family to keep searching, to keep hoping, to never give up when so many people would have eventually accepted that their child was gone. And I cannot imagine what it is like for Rachel to discover at 26 years old that her entire identity was a lie, that the mother who raised her was her abductor, that her real family had been looking for her the whole time. This is too big, too painful, too overwhelming. Steve made a decision. We are not playing a game show today. This family did not come here to win money. They came here to share their story with the world. They came here to let other families with missing loved ones know that sometimes people come home even after many years. They came here to celebrate publicly that their family is whole again after being broken for 17 years. And we are going to honor that purpose. Steve signaled to his producers. The Harrison family is receiving the $20,000 they would have competed for. But more than that, my foundation is going to provide comprehensive support for this family as they navigate reunion and recovery. Rachel needs ongoing trauma therapy to process what happened to her. The family needs family counseling to learn how to be whole again after being fractured for so long. And they all need support as they figure out what their new normal looks like. Steve continued addressing the cameras. There are thousands of missing persons in this country. Thousands of families who do not know where their loved ones are, who live in the terrible limbo of hope and grief that the Harrison family lived in for 17 years. Rachel's story gives hope that sometimes people come home, that sometimes the search ends successfully. But Rachel's story also illustrates the profound trauma of long-term abduction and the complexity of reunion after many years. This is not a simple happy ending. This is a complicated recovery that will take years of work and support, and every family with a missing loved one deserves the same resources, the same persistent search efforts, the same hope for recovery that the Harrison family had. The taping officially ended, but the Harrison family remained at the studio for hours, continuing to share their story with Steve and the production team, processing the significance of having made this public declaration and supporting Rachel through the overwhelming emotions of having her story told on national television. Rachel expressed that choosing to go public with her recovery was both terrifying and empowering, that she wanted other survivors of long-term abduction to know they were not alone, that she wanted to help bring attention to the thousands of people who remained missing. Patricia and Robert talked about how they had maintained hope for 17 years, despite many people telling them to accept that Rachel was probably dead, how they had refused to give up, because they could not live with not knowing, and how finding her alive had validated every moment of those 17 years of searching. Michael and Jennifer spoke about the impact Rachel's disappearance had on their lives, how they had both developed careers focused on helping people because of their experience with losing their sister, how they had both struggled with relationships because they were afraid to get too attached to people who might disappear, and how having Rachel home was forcing them to process 17 years of complicated grief that they had put aside while focusing on searching for her. Jennifer explained that she had become a nurse partly because she wanted to be someone who helped people survive crises, someone who kept people alive when they were in danger, and that Rachel's return had made her question whether she had chosen her career for the right reasons or whether she had been driven by unresolved trauma. The episode aired 6 weeks after the taping, giving the Harrison family time to prepare for the public response they knew would come. The segment featuring their revelation about finding Rachel after 17 years was preceded by extensive disclaimers and resources for families with missing loved ones, and it was promoted as a story that needed to be shared widely. The response was unprecedented. The clip of Patricia revealing that they had found Rachel after 17 years missing, followed by Rachel explaining she had been raised by her abductor under a false identity, and culminating in Steve Harvey walking off stage overwhelmed by emotion, became one of the most viewed moments in television history. The story reached billions of people globally, generating intense conversation about child abduction, about how long-term abductors operate, about the trauma of discovering your identity is false, about the complexity of reunion after many years, and about the importance of never giving up searching for missing loved ones. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children reported a significant increase in families submitting DNA samples and updating their missing persons cases after Rachel's story aired, inspired by the proof that people could be found even after many years missing. Law enforcement agencies around the country reopened cold cases involving missing children, applying new technologies and renewed investigative efforts. Several other cases of long-term abductions were solved in the months following Rachel's story becoming public, as people who had been raised under false identities began questioning their origins and discovering they had been reported missing decades earlier. The response from survivors of long-term abduction was particularly powerful. Dozens of people reached out to share their own experiences of being raised by abductors under false identities, of discovering later in life that they had been kidnapped as children, of the complex trauma of loving the person who abducted you while also being angry at them for stealing your life. Many expressed that Rachel's willingness to speak publicly about her experience had validated feelings they had struggled to articulate, that her description of the complicated adjustment to reunion resonated with their own experiences, and that seeing a family successfully navigate reunion gave them hope for their own relationships with biological families they were reconnecting with after years of separation. The episode also generated important conversations about how child abductors operate, particularly abductors who raise stolen children as their own rather than harming them in obvious ways. Experts explained that this type of abduction often goes undetected for years because the abductor provides basic care and the child has no reason to question their identity, especially if they were taken young enough that memories of their biological family are fragmented or suppressed. Rachel's case illustrated how creating false documentation and moving frequently could allow an abductor to hide a stolen child in plain sight for nearly 2 decades, raising questions about systemic failures that allowed Carol Jensen to maintain her false identity story for so long. The Harrison family became advocates for missing persons awareness and for support services for recovered missing persons. They emphasized in every interview that finding Rachel was only the beginning of a long healing process, that reunion after long-term separation required extensive therapeutic support, and that families should not assume that recovery of a missing loved one meant everything would immediately return to normal. Patricia and Robert spoke at conferences for families with missing loved ones, sharing both their experience of searching for 17 years and their experience of the complicated reunion and adjustment process. They emphasized the importance of never giving up hope, while also being realistic about the challenges of reunion if a missing loved one is eventually found. Rachel became a powerful advocate in her own right, speaking about the trauma of identity-based abuse and about the needs of people who discover late in life that their entire identity was built on lies. She worked with organizations that support survivors of child abduction and with adoption reform groups that advocate for better verification systems to prevent child trafficking disguised as adoption. She was candid in interviews about the difficulty of her adjustment, about how she grieved Carol Jensen even while being angry at her, about how she struggled to integrate her memories of being Rachel Harrison with her 17 years of being Hannah Jensen, and about how she was slowly building authentic relationships with her biological family while acknowledging that those relationships would never be what they could have been if she had not been taken. 5 years after their Family Feud appearance, the Harrison family participated in a documentary about long-term missing persons and reunion. They spoke honestly about the 5 years since Rachel's recovery, about what had gotten easier and what remained difficult. Patricia described how the first few years had been the hardest, how everyone in the family had been processing different layers of trauma simultaneously, how there had been moments when she worried that the damage was too deep to overcome. But she also described breakthrough moments when Rachel had shared a memory from childhood that showed her early family life was still part of her, or when she and Rachel had laughed together over something silly and Patricia had recognized her daughter's laugh from years ago, or when the family had celebrated holidays together and it had felt natural rather than forced. Robert talked about the guilt he still carried for not protecting Rachel better when she was 9, for not being able to prevent her abduction, for not finding her sooner despite searching for 17 years. He explained that therapy had helped him understand that Carol Jensen's actions were not his fault, that he had done everything possible to find Rachel, but that the guilt persisted regardless of logic. He described how being reunited with Rachel had not erased that guilt, but had rather complicated it, because he now saw clearly everything she had missed, every year of her childhood and adolescence he had not been present for, every milestone he had not witnessed. Michael and Jennifer reflected on how having Rachel back had changed their lives in unexpected ways. They had spent their entire adult lives defined partly by being the siblings of a missing child, and suddenly Rachel was no longer missing but present and requiring space in the family system. Both admitted to struggling with feelings they were ashamed to acknowledge. Resentment that Rachel's return meant their parents' attention shifted away from them after years of being the only children present, jealousy of the intensive support and resources directed at helping Rachel adjust, and grief for the sister relationship they had imagined, but which was not developing as simply as they had hoped. Both emphasized that they loved Rachel and were grateful she was home, but that the reality of reunion was more complicated than the fantasy they had held for 17 years. Rachel spoke most extensively in the documentary, reflecting on 5 years of rebuilding her identity and her life. She described the first year as the hardest, when every day brought new realizations about what had been stolen from her, when she was processing overwhelming trauma, while also trying to build relationships with her biological family. She talked about the second and third years as a period of intensive therapy, where she worked through her complicated feelings about Carol Jensen, where she began to truly understand the magnitude of what had been done to her and to her biological family. She described years 4 and 5 as a period of gradual integration, where she started to feel like Rachel Harrison was her authentic identity, rather than a role she was learning to play, where her relationships with her parents and siblings started to feel more natural and less forced. The documentary concluded with the Harrison family gathered together at their home in Phoenix, sitting around the dinner table sharing a meal. The scene was both ordinary and extraordinary, a family eating dinner together, something millions of families do every night. But this family had been incomplete for 17 years and was now whole. Patricia looked at her family around the table, at Robert and Michael and Jennifer and Rachel, and spoke about what it meant to have everyone present. There were so many dinners over those 17 years when we set a place for Rachel, even though she was not there. We never wanted to pretend she did not exist or was not part of our family. So there was always an empty chair for her, a visible reminder of who was missing, and now that chair is filled. My daughter is sitting in it. That is a miracle I will never take for granted. Rachel added her perspective on the ordinary extraordinariness of family dinners. For 17 years, I ate dinner with Carol, thinking that was my family, and now I eat dinner with my real family, and it still sometimes feels surreal that this is my life. But it is getting easier. It is starting to feel like home. I am starting to feel like I belong here, like Rachel Harrison is who I really am, and Hannah Jensen was a role I was forced to play for 17 years. And that is healing, even though it is also still painful to think about all the family dinners I missed, all the conversations I was not part of, all the years I should have been sitting at this table but was not because someone stole me. 10 years after Rachel's recovery, the Harrison family returned to Family Feud for a special anniversary episode. Steve Harvey greeted them with obvious emotion, hugging each family member but holding Rachel longest. I have never forgotten the day you all stood on this stage and told me you had found Rachel after 17 years. I have never forgotten walking off because I could not handle what I was hearing. That was one of the most powerful days of my career, and I have thought about your family many times over the past decade. How are you doing? Patricia answered for the family. We are doing well, Mr. Harvey. It has been 10 years of hard work, therapy, healing, and learning to be a family again. We have all changed. We are not the same people we were 10 years ago or 17 years ago when Rachel was taken. But we are together. Our family is whole, and that is what matters most. Rachel spoke about the decades since her recovery. I am 36 years old now. I have spent 10 years as Rachel Harrison reclaimed, compared to 17 years as Hannah Jensen, the identity that was forced on me. Those 10 years have been full of healing and growth and learning who I really am. I have completed my education. I have started a career helping other survivors of abduction and trafficking. I have built authentic relationships with my family, and I have made peace as much as possible with what happened to me. Do I still have hard days? Yes. Does trauma like what I experienced ever fully resolve? Probably not. But I am building a good life, and that is a victory over the person who tried to steal my life from me. Steve reflected on the impact of the Harrison family's story over the past decade. Your story has helped solve other cases. It has given hope to families with missing loved ones. It has educated people about how long-term abduction works and how to recognize signs that a child might be living under a false identity. And it has shown that reunion, while beautiful, is also complicated and requires extensive support. Thank you for being willing to share your story so publicly. Thank you for letting us into your pain and your healing. And thank you for proving that families who never give up sometimes do get their loved ones back. If this story moved you, if the Harrison family's 17-year search for Rachel and her eventual recovery reminded you of the power of persistence and hope, if you believe that every missing person deserves to be searched for and every family deserves support in their search, please subscribe and share this story widely. Share it with families who have missing loved ones and who need hope that recovery is sometimes possible even after many years. Share it with law enforcement and missing persons organizations who need to be reminded that cold cases should never truly be cold while there is any possibility of resolution. Share it with survivors of long-term abduction who need to know they are not alone in the complicated trauma and healing process. Leave a comment sharing your own experiences with missing loved ones, with reunion after long separation, or with supporting families through search and recovery. Let us create a community that honors the persistence of families who never stop searching, that recognizes the complexity of reunion after trauma, that supports comprehensive services for recovered missing persons and their families, and that commits to ensuring that every missing person is searched for with the same intensity and resources that the Harrison family brought to searching for Rachel. Patricia and Robert showed us that refusing to give up on a missing child can sometimes result in that child coming home, that 17 years of searching can end with recovery, and that families can heal even from the deepest fractures if they have support and time and commitment to the work. Rachel showed us that discovering your identity is false is profound trauma, that loving your abductor while being angry at them is possible, that rebuilding life after such discovery requires immense courage, and that healing is possible even from the most devastating experiences. Steve Harvey walked off that stage because he was confronted with pain and joy so intertwined that witnessing it required more emotional capacity than he could maintain in the moment, and his honest response showed that sometimes the most powerful moments in media are the ones that break us open and force us to feel everything we usually protect ourselves from feeling. Subscribe and share to honor all missing persons and their families, to advocate for better resources for searching for missing people and for supporting recovered missing persons, to raise awareness about long-term abduction and how it operates, and to recognize that behind every missing person statistic is a family in anguish who deserves our support and who should never be told to give up hope, because somewhere there is another Rachel, another person living under a false identity who was stolen from their family years ago and who deserves to be found. And somewhere there is another Harrison family, another family searching for a missing loved one and refusing to accept that their loved one is gone forever. Both deserve our support, our resources, our commitment to never stopping the search until every missing person is found or every case is resolved. Thank you for bearing witness to the Harrison family's story, for understanding its complexity, and for committing to supporting all families navigating the terrain of missing loved ones and the difficult but precious work of reunion when those loved ones finally come home.